In this video, we are going to be talking about men versus women. Really, it's going to be more about masculinity versus femininity. This just seems to be a hot topic right now. There's just a lot of gender debates, and I mean, it's getting pretty wild out there when it comes to this particular topic. And I was just a little curious to see what kind of information I would get. I guess I've always had my own human opinion, but I've never really channeled the information. So I was just a little curious, and so I thought I'd share it with you. My name is Catherine. I'm an energy healer, spiritual coach, and practitioner. If you need personalized coaching or an energy healing from yours truly, then you can go to my website at catherineglassman.com, or you can email me at hello@catherineglassman.com. Now, I do want to preface this video by saying that I do not have any intentions of offending anyone. I really don't. I'm lucky in the sense that I feel like my gender identity is pretty cut and dry. You know, I identify as a woman, and I do struggle with, my masculine and feminine energy, and I'll talk about that later. But for the most part, it's been a pretty simple and straightforward road for me. And so to have like a human opinion about someone else's journey is just not something that I have. I think that honestly, I also identified as a starseed. Okay. I think that I have had multiple lifetimes, many of which were angelic and Palladian, and I have been in many wars, and I've been just some weird things in the past. So, who am I to judge someone about what their identity is, right? So, honestly, I was just more curious about this particular subject because it is just a really huge debate right now. And there is a lot of information out there online, and then it gets the average person kind of heated up and having their own strong opinions when, sometimes we just don't know enough about the subject. And so this is just really my attempt in kind of understanding what that is. And I just wanted to share it with you. So please keep in mind that all of this information is channeled through meditation. So if it resonates with you, then great. And if not, that's fine too. So the first question I asked was, what is it that we need to understand when it comes to men versus women, or masculinity versus femininity? And so the first thing that they showed me, this was a very interesting visual actually. So they showed me a circle, right? A complete circle, which represents God or source frequency, or just the whole, the all, the law of one. Okay. It is everything and nothing simultaneously. Okay. Everything that exists. So just a circle. So then the visual goes from the circle being cut at the top and then straightening into one line. Okay. Then, so basically what they said is, because this dimension, the third dimension, and this planet lives in a dualistic state, meaning that there is a thing and then there is an opposite to that thing, so that we can understand how to differentiate between the two, like up and down, left and right, good or bad, men, women, right? It's just a thing that has an opposite of the thing. And so this is what this straight line represents. And so in this particular case, we are talking about men and women, or masculine and feminine. And so taking the circle and splitting it in half and making it into a straight line and putting men or masculinity on one end and women or femininity on the opposite end, we have now created a spectrum. And so I really should just refer to it as masculine and feminine. So on one end is the masculine, the other end is the feminine, okay? However, it is not necessarily just super cut and dry. It is a spectrum, okay? Each of us are on this spectrum, and some of us are on the far end of one end versus the other. And some of us are not on either end, but a little bit closer into the center. Okay. This actually, now this is just what I've meditated. Okay. So, take it or leave it, because I know that this is probably going to upset people. And I mean, I don't know. I'm sure I'm going to get hate for it, but sorry. So, okay. This can be applied to the physical body. Now, are there two sexes primarily? Yes. And that is more of the physicality portion of it, because the physicality of a male and a female serves for a reproductive purpose. But even within the physicality itself, it can still be on a spectrum. And the reason why it can be on a spectrum is because of hormones. And so a man, can be a man and still have feminine qualities to his physicality based on the amount of estrogen that his body produces, or the lack of testosterone that his body does not produce. And so you can have a man who is masculine, but also have feminine traits. And physically speaking, it could look like gynecomastia, right? Or, breast tissue in men. And from what I've learned as a nurse practitioner, the more body fat a man has, the more estrogen he tends to produce. So that could be another sign, because, women, because we produce more estrogen, we tend to have more fat on our bodies compared to men, right? Like fat mass versus muscle mass. And so the same thing goes with women, right? The physicality of women. Women can, be a female, right? But also produce a lot of testosterone. And the way that physicality would look is it would look like facial hair, right? Or balding, like male pattern baldness, except it's happening to a woman because of the amount of testosterone that's in her body. So even the physical aspect still can be on a spectrum. And so the extreme example of that would be, now apparently this is not politically correct anymore. I'm going to say it because it's the term that I know, but would be a hermaphrodite, or I guess what they are referred to now is ambiguous external genitalia. Okay. And so these are people that are born with both male and female reproductive organs. Okay. This does exist, but it is fairly rare. And so, and this is, and it's just, I think the gender debate is pretty valid when it comes to these particular individuals, because right at birth, if they are born with both reproductive organs, then it is ultimately the parents that end up choosing which organs to have thrive and which ones to eliminate, I guess. And therefore, this individual grows up with an identity that is of the opposite gender that the parents have chosen for them. And so obviously that is understandable for that particular individual. But masculine and feminine energy on that spectrum can apply to a number of things. It can apply to plants. It can apply to an aesthetic, a tone, the way a music. You can apply masculine and feminine to like a lot of things. But even beside the physicality of a human being, being able to be like on a spectrum of feminine and masculine, we're also talking about like the essence of that person as well. Like the energy that soul wants to identify more as. Ultimately, the soul is sexless, right? In the grand scheme of things, everything is everything. Everything is sexless. Everything is just one thing. But the reason why we even have masculine and feminine is, again, just to create a differentiation between two things. And that's it. And so if a soul chooses to incarnate into a body and still have a feminine essence within it, but then be in a masculine male body, then there is a reason for that happening, but it is something that does happen. And, I'm just going to use me as an example. I have always been very masculine. Ever since I was a young kid, I was always called a tomboy. I always did all the things that the boys were doing. I remembered my best friends lived across the street from me, and they were two twin boys. We were very young. I was probably like 5 or 6. And I remember one summer, I was a dirty boy kid, okay? I remember one summer we were all playing outside and we were riding our bikes and it was really hot and the boys took their shirts off. And I was like, oh, okay. So I took my shirt off. Didn't think anything of it. So I'm this little Asian girl riding her bike with two boys that don't have their shirts on, and I have my long dark hair and I don't have my shirt on. And so I didn't think that there was anything wrong with it because I just thought I was one of the guys. And, a woman in the neighborhood came up to me and said, young girls are not supposed to do that. And I was so confused because I was like, why? It's not like there's anything there. I literally, like, my chest at least looks exactly like theirs. So I just didn't understand it. And so it's just a funny thing to think about. It's a funny story. But, even still, as I've gotten older, I still display a lot of masculine traits. And I'll go over the information that I got as far as like why I have, why I feel very masculine. But, I don't think, I personally am on a journey of stepping into my feminine. And I understand that about me. And I know that that is my personal journey. And that is something that I'm trying to work on. I'm really trying to work on receiving and not doing so much and not going after things and feeling like I always have to take care of myself, but stepping into a more empress kind of energy and allowing an individual to take care of me so that I can be a little bit more feminine and more creative and eventually be a mother. And so that is the spectrum. That is the part of the spectrum that I am personally on. But this spectrum will look very different for every individual. There will be very masculine men, and then there will be homosexual men that are feminine, right? And vice versa for women. There will be very feminine women who are, heterosexual, and then there will be feminine women that are not heterosexual. And then there will be very masculine women who are not heterosexual. So it's just, it can go on and on and on, and you can give so many different examples. And this is probably why gender identity is so complex for a lot of people. But the gender aspect and the sexuality aspect is a little different than the physicality of a human body, but still also remains like somewhat on a spectrum. I know yeah. So the next question I asked was, are there gender roles? And what they said is that gender roles are a human concept that was created in order to describe something that one particular aspect, or whether it's meant to describe something that I wrote it down, so I'm just going to repeat it. Gender roles are a human description and label that is used to describe the contribution that masculine and feminine energies are naturally good at. That sounds so much better. Masculine energies tend to be more driven towards a goal or gain more resources, whereas feminine energy tends to nurture things to its fullest potential and create beauty out of the resources that have been provided. This doesn't translate to what men and women are meant to do per se, but rather the energy of the masculine and feminine essence. And so basically what they were saying is that gender roles are really just a human construct, but the construct was based out of the natural gift that either the feminine or masculine just can provide easily. And so because masculine energy tends to be an action-based energy, like a go-getter and a doer, this is why it has always been the thing for the man, the masculine man, to go out and to go work and to go get money or to go gain the resources. Whereas the feminine energy or the women's typical traditional gender role was to stay at home and nurture the children and nurture the family and take the resources that the man has provided, like the food, and to create a dinner out of it and to create a beautiful home. Now, does this mean that that's what men and women are meant to do? No, of course not. But that they're just explaining where that concept came from. And of course, you can still be in a heterosexual relationship where the male man is more in a feminine essence and the female woman is more in a male essence, and therefore the woman goes out and gains the resources and brings home the money where the man stays at home and nurtures the children. Like that is a totally acceptable, way of living, and it does work that way. And then of course you think about like homosexual relationships and things like that. So then my next question was, why is gender such a hot debate right now? And what they said is that the new humans that are coming to the planet, they are allowing themselves to express themselves more freely and openly than the humans did previously in previous generations. There has been a lot of oppression in the past for a number of people and a number of different, species and identities and things like that. There's just been a lot of oppression in general. One of the ones that have been oppressed have been, homosexuals and people not being able to freely just be themselves in regards to gender and sexuality. Because that has been an oppression, now we are stepping into an age where it is becoming more acceptable and encouraged. And because of that, now it's kind of like a pendulum swinging, right? So we're going from the traditional, gender identity and roles and things like that, the traditional sense of a man and a woman and that, swinging to the opposite end of there not being any gender roles. And there are a number of genders and sexes and, whatever. And it's almost, it's like a free for all now. So we're in that transition now where it's kind of swinging to the opposite end because we're making up for the oppression that has happened in the past. Does this mean that it's a good thing? I mean, it's not necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's just something that is going to happen. Eventually, that pendulum will swing back into a middle ground and it won't be such a hot debate anymore. And it won't be so, it just won't be so blasted out there and it won't be so dramatic, right? There won't be so many people that are trying to force others into properly, referring to them as their proper pronouns, and they're not going to be so offended, right? Because that's just where the pendulum is swinging right now. But eventually we will move away from that into a more neutral space, but we are not there yet. This is just a transition period right now where we all just have to have a little patience and a little compassion for everyone. And it comes from all sides, right? We have to have compassion and patience for people that are trying to figure out their own identity, because it's not all of us were blessed to just know, right? Some of us were born into a confused state and they don't feel at home in their body. They don't feel at home in their gender. And that is a very difficult journey for someone to go through. And it would be best to just meet them with some compassion, okay? And just have patience for them to go on their journey and to not pass any judgment. Just let them, if especially if it's someone that you just love them and support them on their journey. Now, but the same can be said about people who want to force people into, referring to them as their proper pronouns and getting offended if someone says ma'am to you, even though you identify as a man. You have to have patience for them too, okay? Because this is a new thing, especially the older generation. I mean, geez, I still get called Oriental. Okay, who cares? I understand that they're not trying to offend me. They're not trying to be rude. It is just a verbiage that they have always used in the past and they still continue to do so. It's okay. I can let it go. I'm secure enough within my own self and my own body to not be so easily offended by what someone else has to say to me, especially when they don't mean me any harm. And so if someone misgenders you, it's okay. If you are secure enough within your own gender identity, then it really shouldn't bother you that much. And that goes the same for the opposite too. If you are secure within your own gender identity, then it really shouldn't matter what someone else does with their own gender, right? So, compassion and patience for everyone. My next question was, is it bad to transition? So, what they said about transitioning from one sex to another is that this is something that many will be contracted to go through. So, this will be a journey that this soul has chosen to go through. And the technology exists for a reason, right? However, does need to have, it does need to be, the the one thing that needs to be looked at first and foremost is, okay, before we come to the planet, before we incarnate, we get to choose everything. We choose our body, we choose our sex, our skin color, our ethnicity, our parents, our siblings, where we're born. We get to choose all of those things because there are a certain set of lessons that we are trying to accomplish. And we choose these things because we know that having that kind of life and those challenges will help us overcome the lessons that we are contracted to learn. And so, if we choose the body that we are in currently, then is it possible that there may be a lesson in accepting the body that you're in, but also feeling like you are not exactly the same sex as it, like your soul isn't aligning with the body? Is it possible that you may be rejecting something that you chose, right? Is it possible that you are rejecting your own body and that is the actual lesson that you are supposed to be learning? Is it possible that you are actually placed in that particular body because you are meant to master that particular essence? And so these are just things that have to be explored before making the permanent decision to fully transition. Because transitioning is not a cosmetic procedure. Even though it can have a cosmetic outcome, it is not cosmetic at all. This is a very serious procedure. It's one thing for a woman to have a cosmetic procedure like getting breast implants, right? You go have surgery, you get silicone implants put in your chest, and then voila, you're done. That is very superficial, like literally superficial. Like the implants are literally on the superficial aspect of the human body, right? That can be reversed. So you can cut that skin open and remove them and be done with it, right? Transitioning from one sex to another, that is not reversible. Taking hormone blockers Maybe if you don't take them for very long, you could potentially get off them and then regain your hormones, your natural hormones back. But if you take them long enough, it will cause permanent changes to your body for the rest of your life. And so they just emphasize that this is something that should be explored first before making this life-changing permanent decision. But that's not to say that there aren't people that are going through all of that entire journey and still making the choice and truly loving the fact that they did it, because that is happening as well. And of course, there are no judgments at all. It's just merely just something that they advise, like just make sure that you have explored everything. Of course, you know, they have me use me as an example, right? I am I am really trying to master being feminine, and it's been hard. It doesn't feel natural to me. I feel very like I hate to say it, but in a lot of my romantic relationships, I've always been the more masculine person. And when I say masculine, I mean not like manly and like doing stuff around the house, even though I do sometimes. It's more of the like the take charge energy, like the leader energy. And I've always been very like, you know, I've always felt like I needed to protect myself. And so I, you know, anytime I've been with a person or a partner, I and this is more of like this is like pre-awakening, right? I always have just been around with partners that where I felt like I was always going to be the one that would protect us, which is not, but I know for me in my journey that that is something that I need to work on, because that is not something that I'm meant to do. I've also done a lot of past life regressions, and I have learned that I keep incarnating as a female, whatever it is, whether it's an alien or a human or an animal or whatever. I keep incarnating as a female. And the reason why is because I am trying to master being feminine. And clearly, I have not. So that's what I'm trying to do in this lifetime. So then my next question was, what about children who are transitioning? And they basically said that children have their entire lives to truly understand who they are. And of course, they go back to me like an adult woman and I'm still trying to master being feminine. And so, children being at such a young age, they are going through a lot of changes, and life is just confusing already. They're still discovering not only the world, but they're discovering who they are in the world. They're discovering where they are on that spectrum and who they are, in as far as being the fractal of source, being the differentiation of them versus everything and everyone else. And because children do not have their brains fully developed, they have not fully developed hormonally, they are still very much growing in every sense that you can think of, maturity, everything. There is some caution that needs to be taken when it comes to affirming a child's perceived gender. It is, of course, something that needs to be explored and it needs to be respected, and the child does need to be heard. But there is a reason why we have put in place certain things that only adults can do. You have to be 18 to join the military. You have to be 18 in order to buy cigarettes. You have to be 18 to get a tattoo. You have to be 21 to drink. You have to be 25 to rent a car. The reason why those exist is because we know that children's brains and maturity are still developing, and that it is not wise to give them those options at a young age. This is no different when it comes to gender affirming surgeries and procedures or medical treatment. And again, these things are not superficial or surface level. These are permanent changes that it's a reproductive change. And hormone blockers and surgeries, the consequences of going through such things are the fact that you will probably not be able to have children. You may not fully develop as hormonally. And so, there might be bone density issues that the person may encounter at a later time. There could be a cancer that will be more likely to arise because of, estrogen or testosterone levels. And then also there is the physical part of having to maintain those particular reproductive body parts for the rest of your life. There are certain things that once you have transitioned, there are certain things that you have to do to your physical body every single day in order for those surgeries to keep hold, because the human body is trying to heal itself, and so it's trying to go back to its natural form, and therefore it's going to like heal and like kind of close up sometimes, or it's just going to reverse on its own. And so because of that, every single day you have to maintain it, and this maintenance can sometimes be very painful. It can cause secondary infections. There are just a lot of complications that can arise, and it's something that needs to be taken very, very seriously. And because it needs to be taken seriously, it really shouldn't be up to a child to make that decision. But as far as like the psychological aspect of the child, like, yes, this does need to be addressed and it does need to be treated with respect. And the child needs to be heard, because there is a lot of difficulty with not understanding what your own identity is when it comes to your own gender. There's a lot of psychological aspects. There's depression and, an increased rate of suicides and things like that. And that of course needs to be taken seriously. But permanently changing the physical body in order to fix those aspects may not necessarily be the answer all the time. And I think right now, just at least within the US anyway, the pendulum is swinging so far on that side that you know, they're trying to like force it down our throats that is the answer. That is what's going to fix it, when it's not the case. That may be the answer for some, but it is not something that really should be encouraged. And I do apologize. Like, that is a lot of that is channeled information, but then some of it is like it's a little bit of a personal opinion too. Like, I don't know. And so I'm just going to admit that about myself at this moment. There is like a mama bear energy that comes in when I hear about these surgeries, because I started off in pediatrics, and I am so grateful that I was a pediatric nurse first and foremost, because it taught me so much. It taught me a lot of critical thinking. You do not make a mistake when it comes to a child. And it's just interesting, because as a nurse, we learn to be the advocate for the patient, right? If there is an elderly patient that might be a little confused about the surgery that they're going to go into, and they feel like the doctor didn't explain it well and they're a little nervous, I halt everything and I get that doctor back in that room and I make sure that they explain it to the patient, that the patient fully understands before they do anything. And that's why people love nurses, is because we will stick by your side and we will make sure that you are fully aware of what is about to happen and that you are okay with it, that you are making this decision. It is an informed decision, right? And so I personally can't imagine being a nurse, with a child that that is the choice that the entire family is making. It just seems a little, it's a big, 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 big decision. And ultimately you can wait. You can wait. If you still feel that way in, 10, 15 years, then go for it. At least that has given you enough time to really think about it. because it's always better to be at a crossroads and do the thing and say, okay, you know what? Yeah, I wish I would have done it sooner. It's better to say that than to go through it and say, I wish I never did that at all. Why didn't anyone stop me? I was just a kid. I didn't know what the hell I was doing. I don't know what I'm thinking, right? So I don't know. That's just my human opinion. I don't mean to offend anyone, but yeah. Anyway, let's move on. My next question was, are men more feminine now and are women more masculine now? So, what they said is that society, humans, especially in the US, are in a transition period and they come back to this pendulum, right? Of traditional values, right? Of, men, women, and gender roles swinging to the opposite end of where it is very up in the air and it's just very different now. Part of this transition is the women's rights revolution, right? Women traditionally for a long time had to rely on a man in order to just survive. There was a time where women couldn't get jobs, they couldn't vote, they didn't have a lot of rights. And so now, because that just simply isn't the case, women are forging their own path and just doing things on their own now. They don't have to get married, they don't have to have children, they don't have to do any of those things. They can pretty much do whatever they want. And they can do things where they make a lot of money. And so that's just one example that they're giving. But because of that, there has been a change in values in gender roles. And so going out and getting money and getting the resources does tend to have a more masculine energy. And if a lot of women are out doing that now, then it kind of gives men the option and the freedom to step into a more feminine essence and to be able to just kind of stay at home and relax and allow her to go out and work. However, the problem currently that a lot of people are facing is that they want it all, I guess. Women are going out and they're forging their own path and they're getting the resources themselves, but then they also want a masculine man to also do those things and to do it better than them so that they can have the option of being in their feminine and not necessarily having to do those things, which then can potentially leave men a little confused about their role in a woman's life or in a relationship. Men traditionally have always been kind of forced into being the masculine aspect because they were married to a woman now and they have children. Somebody had to go out there and go get the money to go get the resources to take care of the family. And it was always traditionally men. And so now that that's not necessarily the case, they can themselves sort of suffer an identity crisis within that as well. But of course, ultimately, this is going to be up to the individual, right? It will be up to them on what part they want to contribute. Now, this is in regards to a relationship. It will be up to the individual of what they want to contribute to that relationship and how they want to contribute to it. And so, for me, as an example, if I want to be with a masculine man, then that would mean that I would probably need to, if I wanted to step into my femininity, which is something that I've expressed earlier in this video, if that is the case, then that means that I would need to step down from having to gain all the resources and feeling like I have to be the one to protect everything and things like that. I have to allow someone else to step up in that place and kind of just receive that protection and those resources. But again, that is something that each individual has to choose. And I will admit that that will be very foreign to me, but it is something that I want to choose. So I mean, I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited. I'm scared because it's just different and it will make me feel a little out of control. They did want to mention too that when it comes to couples and relationships, that it is it is more beneficial for two people to come together who have more of a masculine or feminine essence within them, because the masculine and feminine are not meant to be by themselves, and masculine aren't meant to be together, and masculine or feminine and feminine aren't meant to be together. It's masculine and feminine that are meant to be together because they complement one another. They provide what the other one needs. It is the yin and yang of energies. And again, it doesn't mean that that it's not natural for a man and a man to be together. It's not about that. It's about the energy. So two men can be together, but what will be more beneficial is if the two men are together, that one of them has more of a feminine essence so that they can kind of complement one another in that sense. Because again, the soul is sexless. Everything is sexless. Everything is just one giant thing. It is just a differentiation that we are seeing and experiencing between, you and I and other people. So what is healthy masculine energy? Healthy masculine energy is they are the doers, and they very much are leaders, and they're action takers. They tend to be goal driven, and they are like the herders of the community, right? They're the protectors. Whereas a healthy feminine energy are the nurturers of the herded group. They tend to be the inspiration and the creative aspect. And so I've made a previous video about inspiration versus motivation and how they are two sides of the same coin. And in that video, I explain that motivation is more of the masculine aspect of it, whereas inspiration is more of the feminine aspect. And so that is applied to masculine and feminine energy, right? The masculine is the motivation, the doer, the action taker, whereas the feminine is the inspiration and the creator and the one that nurtures all the resources and creates something beautiful. And it's just funny because the visual I get is like a man, masculine energy going out and getting things, bringing it back to the home. And then the feminine energy creates something beautiful out of it and makes the home into just this oasis and creates a dinner and, raises a family. Masculine tend to be very logical, whereas feminine tend to be more intuitive. The masculine tend to be grounded on the earth, whereas the feminine tend to be a little bit more airy and spiritual. But this is why they complement each other so well, because the masculine will ground the feminine, whereas the feminine will lift the masculine. And they just work so beautifully together. So then I asked, well, what is toxic masculinity and toxic femininity? And they really just wanted to emphasize that there really is no toxic masculinity or toxic femininity. There's just toxic. And, a toxic behavior or a toxic trait or a toxic person, it is just a toxic behavior, but the way that it is expressed can either be in a masculine sense or a feminine sense. So toxicity that is expressed in a more masculine way will be like violence, or using like their physicality as a means of intimidation or as a fear tactic, or maybe even using like logistics and logic to make you feel stupid. Whereas toxicity that's expressed in a more feminine way will look more like manipulation or gossiping It's a more underlying and covert attempt at putting someone down. And this can even be expressed through like narcissism, right? So grandiose, overt narcissism will be more masculine, whereas a covert, vulnerable narcissism will be more feminine. And even like sexually, right? Toxic masculine energy when it comes to sex will be of a like taking, right? Sexual assault, just taking it. Whereas a toxic feminine energy will be using sex to get something else or to get what they want. So at the end of the day, there is no toxic masculinity, even though there is a label and things like that. And, that's fine. There is no toxic masculinity. It's just toxicity that's expressed in a masculine or feminine way. And so ultimately, this is just a big transition that we are going through right now. And I think that a lot of us are going through a transition individually. A lot of us are going through a transition personally as well. And with the use of social media and, classic media, it is being magnified and kind of put on the spotlight and even sometimes just thrown in our faces. And that is why it's just creating a big debate. But really, we are just all one thing. And we're all on a journey, and we all just need to support each other on these particular journeys. It's going to be okay. It's not a big deal. We don't have to fight over it, but we should just be supportive of one another, but also protect one another from making permanent decisions that we may regret later. So I hope that was objective and did not offend anyone, because I definitely didn't want to do that. I was a little nervous even making this video, but I trust that you understand that that's not what I'm trying to do. I am just simply channeling information and relaying it to you. But I have to admit that there was a little bit of a personal opinion thrown in there. So sorry. But anyway, I hope you liked the video. Give it a thumbs up if you did. Consider subscribing, and I will see you next time. Bye.